to move through it fast. All right, everyone, welcome to the August 2025 ACP meeting. It is Monday, August 11th. I'm facilitating today in lieu of Brian, who is traveling for some family obligations. Hi, Arthur, good to see you. We are just getting started. Please mute your microphone unless you are speaking. Any guests in attendance should introduce themselves in the chat, listing their organizational affiliation and providing their contact information. As far as I know, we got no guests today. So let's jump right into approving our draft minutes. Anyone have anything they wanted to add or edit in the draft minutes from our July meeting? No? Okay, can I get a motion to approve the minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
Can I get a second?
A second.
Okay, all in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Any opposition? Great. All right, minutes approved. Good work, team. Let's next move into some status reports from our subcommittees. We're going to go ahead and start with this compliance subcommittee. I can provide a quick update, and then Francisco or John or Arthur, you can add in as needed. I believe we had 1 or 2 meetings in the past month. We were still working through the Effective Law Enforcement for All report with some incredible work by Francisco on each of the recommendations. We've got a little ways to go on that, but we are slowly consolidating a list of questions and recommendations for the council. Anyone else want to chime in? Great. All right, let's get a quick report from the school subcommittee. I know Terry isn't here. Sean, did you have anything you wanted to remark on from the school subcommittee?
Nothing in particular. Just that we touched on the role of the school resource officer. The fact that they're actually not stationed in schools, which I know some may have some concern with actually having a police presence in the school. And I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly, Officer Innocente. Is that correct?
Innocente. Yep. We had a conversation with him.
Correct. And I believe he's on tonight. But he gave us some perspective on the current model of the community engage officer, which these resource officers are known as at this point. We spoke about their annual training through the Maryland Safe Schools Training Association. He gave us some information on actually how many high schools that MCPD is actually involved with, the fact that it's 22 out of 26 high schools. I believe the other 4 high schools fall under the purview of like Rockville City, and I believe Park Police.
Park Police, yep.
And we're still trying to get some additional information from him where we can update the entire committee forthcoming. So that's pretty much what I remember off the top of my head.
That squares pretty well. We sent him a list of questions that were consolidated by Terry. We'll get answers on those shortly. Officer Innocente, did you have any updates on the questions that we sent that you wanted to add?
No, I will just say that Rockville City is taking over a second school. So Rockville City Police is going to be taking over Wootton High School now.
In addition to Rockville High School?
Correct. Or
okay.
No,
Good
they have Richard Montgomery, and they now have Wootton. We cover Rockville.
Got you. Okay, thank you for that update.
Sure.
Wonderful. All right, let's move on to the data subcommittee. Francisco and friends.
I defer to Sonny.
Yeah, Francisco, you can go ahead. I was out for a couple of weeks, right? So you have the latest and greatest on the data.
Well, we have not met since our last meeting, but I did. I think we've communicated by email. There were some issues and some suggestions, but we haven't had the opportunity to discuss them yet. But look forward to getting a lot of work done. This is the more you look into it, the more that there is serious matters that we should be looking at.
So we have a new member also. We added a new member, our Christina, I believe, is part of our data committee subcommittee too. So
Great. Congrats to Christina for joining.
Yeah, that's correct.
All right. Wonderful. Anything else anyone wants to add from the committee updates? Okay. Let's get some updates from our commission staff on our proposed public forum. Susan and Logan?
Logan, did you want to go through it? I'm happy to it's up to you.
Sure, I can do that. So Susan and I discussed with our colleagues in the Public Information Office some of the logistics regarding the public forum, which the Commission is interested in holding in person at the Council Office Building in September. That will be plausible, although it would not be, and I believe the Commission had previously discussed its intent to hold that fully in person. It would not be logistically plausible to do hybrid, just because that would require some staff time that the council is not able to provide for this session, but the commission could hold a session in the council office building. I believe, Susan, we said the third floor hearing room, which is the main council hearing room. The members of the commission could be seated at the table, which is in front of the dais. So typically the chairs are facing the council members at the dais, but we could move the chairs so that they face the audience, and the commission could be all seated at the front of the room. And then we had some thoughts about in discussion with PIO, some thoughts about the potential format of the meeting, but regarding logistics, I'll just leave it there if anyone has any questions or comments.
That's great. That sounds like a wonderful format. I guess I have two questions, which is one, I understand that it's logistically not feasible to do a hybrid option. Given that folks may not want to turn up in person, could we solicit questions or comments from the public in case they're unable to attend in person? And then also, could we record the session so that folks who can't make it can still get a gist of what was said? And then the second question being, how is this being publicized?
Yes, I believe it can be streamed. Is that your recollection, Susan?
Yes.
So it can be live streamed, it just can't be.
Okay.
The virtual folks will be able to watch it, they just won't be able to participate.
Okay.
And in terms of your other question, Eva, we could we're already getting comments via the online forum of topics that people are interested in discussing. Our suggestion, which I believe I had sent out to the full commission, was that this be, and I know there's some discussion about this, but this could be just more broadly a listening session, so that the comments that people send in via the email form are identical in format, if not in substance, to the comments that people in person would be providing anyway. So if you're not able to attend, you could still submit via the form. But obviously that's the commission's purview.
Okay. In terms of the topics, yes, John.
Question on if it wasn't, now normally we're YouTube live, correct? Are we social media live?
But this
No,
this
actually-
meeting is not live. It's posted. It's the link is advertised so people can join the Zoom live. But otherwise the recording is posted on YouTube usually the following day.
You said the following day.
Mhm.
Okay. But my question was, if we were if it was live stream and we were streaming live and somebody might have asked questions in the chat, could we have one of the commissioners watching the chat for questions?
Didn't we
That
stream
way
it?
it would not require anybody else to work overtime. I think that's the question I have.
I would be happy to do that if that's feasible.
I thought we streamed it over Facebook last time. Logan, do you remember?
I think that's right. And then people would be able to comment. So as you know, as a visitor to the Facebook page, a commissioner would be able to keep an eye on the comments. And discuss
Okay.
them.
I would be able to do that if, especially if a computer was provided at the building that has that capability, just so that I'm not bringing my own. But regardless, like I would be happy to keep tabs on that.
And I'd be able to help with that as well if, you know,
Sure.
so if there's two platforms like YouTube and one Facebook, or we could take turns either. I'd be willing to assist that as well.
Awesome.
And Eva, I apologize. I neglected to answer your second question about how it's going to be advertised. But once the commission makes the final decisions on the format, we'd be able to work with PIO to get out a press release and advertise it that way. And then, of course, we would ask commissioners to share with your networks as well.
Great.
Susan, is
Okay.
there a certain platform that the county or the council requires us to use for something like that, or for a hybrid option?
I don't think so.
We should, verify, but that is a good question, Christy. So I know there have been discussion both in our previous meeting and on the email chain about the topic and format of the live forum, with some folks saying they didn't want it just to be a generic listening session, but also, the public has comments and concerns that they want heard. So what I would like to do right now is just get a quick temperature check on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is super enthusiastic about the idea of just a public listening forum, and 1 is absolutely not. I want there to be a specific topic. Everyone, please hold up a number of fingers or type in the chat your preference for this session. Does everyone understand what I just asked? So 5 if you really want a public comment session, and 1 if you really want a specific topic. You can either hold up fingers or put it in the chat. Okay. Let's see. I see 5 from Francisco. I saw 5 from Henry, 1 from Cherie, 5 from John, 4 from Sunny, 4 from Christina, 5 from Arthur. Interesting. 3.5 from Christy, 5 from Sean. Okay, so I'm seeing mostly that folks are leaning towards a public comment session. Now, in the interest of making sure everyone's opinion is heard here, and also because I regard Cherie very highly in terms of her thoughts and opinions, like, I would love to hear why, Cherie, you think it is not the best idea to have a public comment session, and then we can see if we want to compromise or change course or what we want to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So thank you, first of all. I think very early on we did like an open town hall. I don't think we call it town hall, but we did like an open forum, and it was, just y'all come kind of thing. And what we got were a whole lot of people who showed up to say how great the police were. Yeah, I don't have any problem with believing that the police are great, but that's not really I don't think that really informs our work. I really think people ought to be able to show up and say, hey, the police are great, but you know, when that becomes the atmosphere, then folks who may have issues that they would like to raise, especially if we're going to be in person, then it becomes intimidating for people, you know. And so so yeah, that's why, you know, and maybe the compromise is, I don't know if we had talked about a time slot, but you know, maybe the compromise position is, you know, for, you know, the first half or whatever, we do a guided conversation in you know, something that provides people with information on stuff they may not know. Okay. Maybe even an update on stuff we've been doing, you know. That might be really helpful to tell people, hey, look, this is who we are, and these are the letters we've sent, this is the stuff we've done, we're here. But there might be other things folks want us to look into, and then you have the public comment section. Okay. I mean, that would be but from my perspective, before, when we had just the open y'all come, it was, you know, it was the booster club, and it wasn't necessarily helpful to our work. So
Yeah.
that is that's you know, that's the essence of my concern about that.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, Sheree. Christy, I'm going to get to you in a second. Just to make sure that we're all on the same page, what I'm hearing is that, and I agree that this is actually corroborated by the feedback that we're getting from our feedback forms. What I'm hearing is that in the past, when we've had these public comment sessions, it has felt like an environment where people only or largely feel confident to say positive things about the state of policing in the county, and not necessarily an atmosphere where people can have their issues or questions heard. I think this is backed up by the fact that a lot of the comments that we get in our online platform are requesting more policing, including for nonviolent types of things like noise complaints. So I'm totally hearing you on that, and I like the idea of a hybrid model. I'm also wondering what other things could make folks feel safer to be critical if they want to be. And I think, you know, having it in a county government office building with, of course, officers present makes some folks, especially folks in the most marginalized communities, not feel safe. And so I think having the option for anonymity based on social media comments on the live stream is going to be very helpful for that. And then, yes, also having a hybrid model of some sort of information session and then a public comment period, I think is a good way to split that up. Let's hear from Christy and then Francisco, and then we can take another temperature check.
I like, excuse me, I like the idea of sort of starting with just an overview and some of the things that we've done. I'm wondering if we could maybe, instead of just saying, come and give comments about the police, if we could somehow frame it in some way to say, here's what our purpose is. And, you know, we are a body that is meant to advise the county council, and we are interested in your feedback, either on topics that you care about in your community, or that you have seen as an issue in your community, or you know, somehow ask people the types of things, you know, based on our strategic plan and what we've talked through, which types of things do they sort of agree with prioritization of. Like, I'm just trying to think about, instead of like, okay, here is the whole gamut of everything, like trying to frame it with a almost like a discussion question to help guide the public comment or topic.
I love that idea. You know, as an educator and a facilitator, I think we could very easily draft copy for the publicity for this. That's like, we're hosting a listening session for folks to envision and discuss how policing can be made better in the county and what they want to see from public safety in the county. Something like that. So people are being encouraged to think about what their goals are, what their hopes are, and what they want to see improve. Francisco and then John.
Yeah, thank you. I agree that I like the idea of a sort of the compromise that Sherry suggested. I like specifically, I get the sense that folks in the community don't really understand what we do, and you know, and very few of them probably know where of our website. And I think it's a very good opportunity to one and as a context, providing context for the public forum, explaining what our duty is. And you know, you don't need to go through every bit of the strategic plan for the year, but explaining, providing examples of what it is that we do, and the focus of some of our most recent work.
That would be a great topic for an info session. Like, I think we could very easily give, you know, a 30-minute presentation on, you know, the history and context and present of the ACP and some of our recent work. And that could also motivate folks to join and fill some of these empty slots or join in future iterations of the commission. So that could be great. And maybe it will encourage folks also to weigh in more, to use our public comment site, all of that. John?
Yeah, I co-sign everything. Sheree, I appreciate that. That hybrid. Yeah, I do feel that if a lot of folks don't know what we do, especially when we had the session we had with the new recruits, they kept calling us council members. But I do recall us, and Susan, you can probably help. There was one topic we just kind of threw out there. We didn't vote on it, that we thought might be good for this meeting, and I just cannot recall what it was. It was something new. I think we did discuss the encryption. I think that last week, I think that was tossed out in a conversation that we might
Immigration, possibly?
Yeah, it was a couple things we had tossed out that we might want to address. And I'm not opposed to at least addressing something that is currently affecting our county. I do think it's probably more feasible, especially if we're going to be on site somewhere, that it just kind of legitimizes, if you have lack of a better word, who we are and what we're doing. So I love what Sheree presented, but I do recall us mentioning one or two things that we wanted to use possibly as a topic.
Could we?
Was it the right to leave? I'm sorry to cut you across, Eva.
No, go ahead.
Councilman Jawando's bill, I think that might have been
I think we've already done that in the last public forum. Not the bill he proposed, but the
discussion surrounding.
Yeah, the policy, the revised
Freedom
policy.
to Leave Act.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, the FOP policy,
Yeah.
the internal policy.
What we talked about before was the role of county police in the whole immigration thing. That was what we had mentioned before. And I don't think we did vote on it. I think it was just something that, you know, was thrown out as a possible topic.
I mean, I think that's extremely salient right now. And if we give folks the capability to participate remotely via our social media live streams, I think that will make that topic much more accessible. And I think it really is something we should be talking about, especially given the recent news about the deployment of the National Guard and all that. Sheree, do you still have a question, or is your hand just up?
No, my hand, I didn't lower my hand from before. Let me do that now. Thank you.
Okay. Susan?
I just wanted to try to clarify something. The police have absolutely no role in immigration. So if you want to connect the police to the immigration topic, I think we need to be explicitly clear that the police have absolutely zero role in that. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that's the kind of question they could answer, but there's not much
Well, I
there to
think-
discuss. Our jail has much more involvement than police do.
Well, I would be interested to hear about how our jail is involved because that's news to me. But I think, I think people should know exactly the ways in which the county and any of our systems are or are not involved because it is such a salient issue. And I think if we do a brief presentation on who the ACP is and what we do, and then a presentation on like how MCPD and the corrections departments are and are not involved in immigrations, I think that could be very informative for folks.
I'm sorry, I just have a question though. If we're advising on policing in the county, might it be just a little overreach to now start stepping into the Department of Corrections, which is a totally separate entity?
That is a fair point, although I will say that the Effective Law Enforcement for All report that we've been analyzing does have recommendations for the Department of Corrections. So it's not entirely out of pocket. Correct me if I'm wrong, Francisco. I could be misremembering.
From my reading of, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Arthur.
I don't know why my raise hand function is not working, so that's why I'm busting in here.
No, not a problem.
Back to the public forum for a second. I want to say, it's my experience that people are intimidated in public forums as a whole, which I think Sherry indicated that once people start saying something positive, and people get intimidated, and that brings me to say that maybe we should do something to prepare people for that sort of thing, like explain what we are looking for, such as, we want to know how we like to know, is there anything that you in the community or that you have seen that you would like to improve upon, not so much to complain about, but to improve upon, that you think would work better? Kind of write something up in or email it, whatever way we do that sort of thing, to the people before they get to the meeting, or have it handing out. Please do not, saying something additionally, like, please, if there's something that you feel that is personal to you and you see it, please we would really appreciate you letting us know now, sort of something like that.
So what I'm hearing is ask people to come in with specific suggestions or observations in mind.
Yes, that's, I think sometimes you have to tell people what you're looking for,
No, absolutely.
Because they're not like us sitting here or have done, have your background where we don't really care what, that somebody don't agree with us or something like that. People in the community have to go back home and all that kind of stuff, and may feel intimidated accordingly to do that.
Yeah, that's a great observation. We should definitely include some language on that in our copy. Can I get a quick show of hands of who would like to collaborate with me on writing that language? What was that gesture, Francisco? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to answer the question on corrections. And as I understand it, Susan, you can be, you have more experience than me on this, but my understanding is that corrections is out of our purview.
It is.
Okay.
And I linked the policy for you to read after the meeting if you're interested. So
thank you. Okay, so then maybe immigration is not the right topic to be covering, but we should absolutely provide context on what the ACP is and what we do. I feel like that's the bare minimum that we can do in terms of informing the public. Shuri, was that hand raised for helping me draft language, or was it for a question?
It was for helping you draft language.
Great. Okay. So Shuri and I will connect offline and help come up with language for the publicity for the forum. Anyone? Oh, so I guess let's get a temperature check before we do anything formally. Now on a scale from 1 to 5, how do we feel about a hybrid public forum model with the ability for folks to comment on social media, have those comments be read and moderated by commission members, and starting with an information session, and also with the discrete ask of bringing in observations and suggestions? On a scale from 1 to 5, you can put up the fingers or put it in the chat.
I'm sorry, Eva. Is 1 approval or is 5 approval? I don't know.
5 is approval.
Okay.
5 is approval.
Okay.
Thank you for clarifying.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. I see a bunch of 5s. I see a bunch of 5s. I see at least a 4 from Shuri. Okay, that's a 5.
Yeah, that's a 5. It's 5.
Great. Okay, in that case, can I get a motion to move forward with that as our public forum?
Can you just reiterate where we're landing? I just want to make sure that I understand.
Absolutely. So what we're landing on is a public forum that will begin with an info session on what the ACP is and what we do, and then have a listening session with the specific ask for folks to bring in observations or suggestions about public safety in the county. And then it will be live streamed on Facebook and or YouTube, with commissioners having the ability to moderate and respond to comments.
But we're not going to focus in on a specific topic, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. So
But we do want
I'll make
people to bring in constructive feedback.
I will make a motion that we proceed with our public forum in September to start with a
Info
brief
session.
overview of our commission and what we've been up to, followed by a more structured, question-based format that Shuri and Eva are going to work on.
Can I get a second?
A
I
second.
second.
All right. All those in favor say aye or make a thumbs up or whatever.
Aye.
Aye.
All right. Any opposed?
Great.
Okay, motion carried. Good work, team. So, Shuri, I'll connect with you in the next couple days to help draft some copy. Logan or Susan, hopefully we'll have that to you by the end of the week, early next week. Is that a good time frame? Does that work?
That's great. I was going to hope for at least 2 weeks to advertise. So if you can get it by the end of this week, that would be amazing.
Great.
Well, I'm efficient and I know Shuri gets things done. So if anyone else would like to join us, please shoot me an email. Totally understand if not. So the date for this would be what, 4 weeks from now? So September 8th, is that correct? Okay, great.
Yeah.
At our normal time, is that correct? Cool. Any other comments or feedback on this before we get into new business? Yep, Francisco?
Will there be any representatives of MCPD there to answer specific questions, or do we want to just maybe not need it?
So and I'm not going to speak for everyone. I have the feeling that folks will be more comfortable, like members of the community will be more comfortable
Okay.
making constructive criticism if there are not MCPD representatives
Okay.
there. But I am open to feedback on that.
I'm fine with that.
And I
I'm
want to make
fine
sure I'm going to the right place. We're going to the which building?
County Council building.
Okay, got it.
So I think it would be helpful if we didn't necessarily have MCPD there. Of course, it's public, so you know if folks want to come, we can't say y'all can't come. But it would be good. It might be a good follow-up for us to use that as a part of what we then send to the police department. Like, you know, we had this thing and, you know, these are some of the issues that came up. Maybe we could include their responses on the website to those questions. So that it becomes like a continuing, you know, a continuing exercise, not just like a, you know, one shot. Okay, we did this. We were required to do it. See you, bye. Does that make sense?
Sounds good.
I'm not sure I caught that, but I'm sure you're correct.
I mean, well, yeah, because, you know, sometimes I get incredibly Southern. Okay, so first one, I agree that we shouldn't have the police department there. We can't, it's a public thing. They can be there if they want to be. But I don't think we should invite them there specifically to answer any questions. If they're in the audience and there's something they want to answer, that's cool and groovy. So that's number one. Number two is that, you know, since this will be recorded in some format, since then that might provide us with an opportunity to then write the police department and say, hey, look, we had this public forum. Here are the issues that came up. We'd appreciate your commentary. Then we can use that on our website and saying, you know, we had this public forum. These are the things that came up. We asked the police and here's what they said. So that it becomes a continuing dialogue. That's what I'm suggesting.
Oh, yes. I love that idea. That's a great idea. Is that Susan and Logan something you'd be able to help us bottom line?
Yes.
Cool. Great. All right. Any final thoughts on this? All right. Let's bring up some new business. Francisco has drafted 3 excellent letters about MCPD's booking photo release policy, the FC 210 policy on mission and organizational values, and then FC 131, which is on use of force. So we're going to go through and discuss those. Logan just sent out another email with each of those draft letters. And now I know that we're a wonky bunch. We all want to get into details. I would say for tonight, let's focus on overall structure and content and main ideas. If you have strong feelings about specific words or specific wordings, as long as they're not materially affecting the substance of the letter, please email those thoughts to Francisco separately. Great. Let's not quabble over a Word document all night. So, without further ado, Susan or Logan, would you be able to pull up the first letter, or should I? I'll put the links to those in the chat.
I wanted to suggest that we kind of proceed out of order, that we use the mugshot letter first, because that's shortest and probably because the other letters, yeah, Francisco is like, he did a great job. And so, you know, they might require, you know, they might spur more conversation. I think the mugshot letter is probably pretty Yeah, I hope it's pretty easy.
Sure.
So I'll start with the mugshot letter by telling you that I just found out that in fact FC 1141 is under review. So that's the policy. The public, that's the MCPD policy that governs the release of mugshots. And as I understand it, they are no longer mugshots. And in fact, if you look at MCPD's press releases, none of the photos included look like mugshots. They're basically looks like somebody's taking a photo with their own phone of an individual. My suggestion is that we need to go on to the next step, and rather than just ask for the information, since we know that the policy is under review, and what we're going to get as a response is, this is the policy that governs it, and it's under review, and we're accepting public comments. So we can do one of two things. One is right now discuss one or two governing principles that we want to recommend, or just table it and discuss it separately. So right now, the policy is that mugshots or photos may be released because they are public documents. The exception is children under 18, unless they're charged as an adult. And that doesn't address the issue that in some cases we see that the photos included in the MCPD release, in some MCPD releases, photos are included, and in other of the suspect or the person being charged, in others they are not. As far as I'm concerned, and this is my own personal view, photos should not be released in MCPD releases, except when MCPD is looking to identify a suspect or find him, or in cases where MCPD is looking to find additional possible victims tied into this particular suspect. And of course, if someone, the media asks for a photo of the suspect, because it is public record, then they would release it. So that's where we are on this letter. And I'm sorry, it's a little bit more complicated than I expected until this moment.
Well, let me just say that I agree with your reasoning and your position. I don't think they should release photos of people and that unless they are seeking, as you said, to identify those people, seeking the public's help in identifying those people, or seeking the public's help in coming up with additional folks who may have been exposed to them, because I don't want to say victims. I mean, I don't know, everybody's innocent until proven guilty, right? So
right.
That I think so I agree with what you're saying, and I don't think there's anything about this letter that can't be used exactly the way it is. I mean, if they are reviewing the policy, we're asking them to say, we are asking that they review it with a social justice lens in essence, and that they not release the photos. Of course, the letter doesn't say that, but we are asking that they review it with a social justice lens. So, I don't, other than you know, I don't see anything wrong with the letter in light of the additional information you provided. I believe the letter is still fine the way it is.
Yep. I mean, I think this is an excellent letter in its substance. I feel like there are some slight phrasings that I would change, but again, I will connect with you about that offline, or you can reach out.
Yeah, I just added, sent you on the chat some language that I would use instead of the 2 paragraphs asking for information. That's my, if that would be my suggestion. And I can, we can, that I'm not, you know, we can adjust the language, the text itself. And I think John has his hand up.
Yeah, I have a question. Generally, a mugshot is, I heard somebody mention, look like cell phone. I know a long time ago, and they may still do this, officers were taking pictures of certain people on the side of the road with their cell phone. Are we talking about that, or are we talking about the actual mugshots that when they are at 7 Locks and they've been charged with something? Is this what we're discussing, those pictures?
We're discussing the pictures that are included in the MCPD press releases.
The press release, okay.
And
those pictures, are those pictures the mugshots that come from when they're charged with something, or there are other shots included with that?
My understanding is that there are other shots. These are not official photos. And Susan, please correct me if I'm wrong. These are not official photos that are taking, you know, that we are used to seeing with, you know, the profile and the frontal and the profile and the measuring of the height.
So not the processing photo, not when they're actually processed through the system.
Okay.
My understanding, I'm sorry, my understanding is that those types of booking photos are owned by the jail, the Department of Corrections, and they are not currently shared with the police department, but I don't have that confirmed at this point. And the photos that are being used are something that officers may or may not have taken during the investigation process. Maybe Lieutenant Anseni has a better insight than me.
So I know what you're referring to. I don't know whose decision it is to release what kind of photos. I do know that officers do have access to the mugshot database. So I don't have access, but I know that if requested, we can have access to the database that allows us to pull up the mugshot that's taken at 7 Locks.
I have another
Sometimes those photos
These pictures do not look like that though, right? Like the ones that we looked at in the press releases were different. And so I think this is a broader question of like any photo in the press release.
Right.
I will say that the photos that are taken at 7 Locks sometimes aren't immediately available in the system. And again, I don't want to speak out of turn, but that may be a reason why another photo is used that's taken, you know, by an investigator, but I really don't know.
My part 2 to that is that who makes a decision to release it or not release it?
So we have a public information office, and there's a director of our public information office who actually is not a sworn person. She's a professional staff, civilian.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions on this first letter?
Just want to ask a question. It's just a question, really. Is there any situation where we might not want to release a photo because it might put someone in danger? Would that come into play here? And I just wonder.
My question, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. My question is, what is a photographable offense and what's a fingerprintable offense? Every time someone's arrested, not everything is a photographable offense, and not every offense is also a time when a person is taking fingerprints. In the Department of Corrections, they may take pictures of individuals just so that they could pretty much verify who is who and where and what cell they're going into, a management type of thing. That's generally not, it's like an in-house type of photograph. But if someone's arrested for a robbery, that might be a photographable offense, and it usually is. But if someone who just stopped for DUI or things like that, that may or may not be a photographable offense.
So I will say anybody who's taken to central processing over at Seven Locks, they are fingerprinted and photographed. To your example, a DUI isn't taken to Seven Locks. They're taken to the police station and processed there and generally released after they're issued traffic citations. Officers will take a photo of that person for their case files so that when they come to court, they have the photo. Well, and that's evidence. If you have a person who you've arrested for DUI and they clearly look intoxicated, that's evidence for their case also. So usually if it's not a case that's taken, where the person's taken to CPU, I would say generally officers still take a photo of the instance.
Yeah.
I think, it's not about whether or not we're taking a photo, though.
Right.
It's about whether or not it's being released via press release. So I don't care. They can take a photo of whoever they want for MCPD purposes, but they need a clear policy on when the photo should be released via press release.
Yeah, because frankly, like, what does publicizing someone's photo accomplish unless that person has escaped and has committed a violent offense? That's one thing, but truly, what does publishing a mugshot accomplish in terms of making the public safer?
Yeah, no.
All it seems to accomplish is shaming someone.
So it seems to me that we're all pretty much in agreement about the need to have a stricter policy on releases. I provided some language, and I can plug that language in instead of the 2 questions asked in the letter, and I'll take any comments, suggestions on any modification of the language. But if we can just, I think, move on with this letter, I think we're in good shape.
Okay, so what, in terms of formally moving on this letter, what would that motion look like?
I would move to approve the sending of the letter with the new language that I have put in the chat at 7:21, that would urge MCPD to revise its policy so that photos are not included in MCPD press releases of informing the public of an arrest or an individual being charged, unless the department is either trying to identify or find a suspect, or they are trying to identify possible other possible victims of the suspect.
Okay, can I get a second for that?
A second it.
Can I offer
right.
a basic amendment
Sure.
to approve the sending of the letter with inclusion of any minor
Sure.
grammatical corrections
Thank
or
you.
suggestions?
Good point, good point.
Good
All right,
point.
can I get a second of that motion?
I second that.
Great, all those in favor, show it.
Aye.
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 Great, any opposed? All right, motion carried. Excellent, all right. Let
Next
me
let-
take a,
Go ahead.
yeah, which letter would you like to move on to, Francisco?
Well, let's see. I think we can do both letters. The first one is fairly broad, and it deals with the department's mission and organizational values. That's
Sure, okay, can we pull up that one?
And while that's being pulled up, I can just summarize it.
Great.
So the department was accepting public comments on this particular policy, which is the overarching policy and for the department. What I think it's very important is for us to weigh in separately as an ACP. And I reviewed the mission and organizational values, in this letter, we urge MCPD to make clear that the policy sets forth the expectations of the department and the community, that the mission be framed, its equitable policing objectives be framed in the context of the broader public safety goal, and that values should reflect the core principles of policing by consent and community policing, and promote the culture of the guardian instead of that of the warrior. And the reason why I think this is important is because in our review of the recommendations of the Reimagining Policing Task Force, Equitable Law Enforcement for All, and Maryland Police Accountability, community policing was at the center of these recommendations, and specifically the guardian shifting from the warrior culture to the guardian culture. And I think it's very important that it be included in this policy.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone have questions or comments about this letter?
Okay, I do. Have no problem with the overall message of the letter. I would just recommend that that the phrase policing by consent and the phrase community policing be actually spelled out a little bit more. Because the somebody who reads this and who's not kind of totally ingrained in all these concepts is probably going to not understand what we're trying to say.
Right.
And so I would and I would you get to movement from the warrior culture to the guardian culture. That doesn't come into the end. I think it would be very helpful to move that up, like almost at the beginning, and then explain the policing by consent and the community policing concepts, and then then to me, anybody who picks this up and reads it would have a clearer understanding of the other points we're trying to make. But I agree with I agree with the letter. I agree with this incredible work you've done to spell this out.
I think that's a great point, Cherie. Cherie and Francisco, can you connect on how best to do that, either via email or asynchronously in the doc?
Yeah, it seems to me that this is very easy. What we can do, what I can do, is move up the discussion part of the letter and to the top, and then make the specific policy recommendations, the specific recommendations regarding policy, mission statement, organizational value afterwards. I think that addresses your concern, Cherie. In terms of putting, in terms of making sure people understand what community policing and policing by consent are, I have that information in the endnotes, and I can work with you to, to see if we can put it in the framework of the context, and move it up.
Yeah, that's
I'll
fine.
gladly work with you if we can. If there are any other suggestions, otherwise I can work with Cherie to, basically rework the document, and then, since we're not changing anything factual, once we have it, then we can send it for signature, if that's okay with everyone.
Can I get a motion to approve this letter with the edits as suggested by Cherie and enacted by Francisco?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
I second that.
All right, all those in favor, say
Aye.
aye, raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye.
Great, all those opposed? Wonderful, motion carried, letter approved with those edits. All right, our final letter is gonna be on the use of force policy. We could pull that up. Francisco, you wanna give some background on this? Francisco, you're muted.
Thank you. This letter, so reviewed FC 131 policy, and in the context of the recommendations and that we have received from Reimagining Policing Task Force, Equitable Law Enforcement for All, and the mandate of the Maryland Police Accountability Act. And so the letter provides some general comments, expressing specific concern with that the guidelines provide a lot of leeway. And when you provide, as an organization, when you provide guidelines, you're providing, you have, and figuring out where those guidelines lie, you have to understand that even your best people, the best officers, are going to make mistakes, are going to have, these are very difficult situations. And so you normally take into account that, and the guidelines don't go as far as they could be, but they're shortened to allow the fact that some folks are going to make honest mistakes, and at the same time you avoid the most negative outcomes for the community, for the officer, and for others. And so that's one point we make. And then the other thing, the other focus is that the other concern is that other parts of the policy omit broader public safety considerations or de-emphasize de-escalation in a way that I think undermines the department's embrace of community policing. And it lists a lot of factors without saying, these are the things that we will consider when an officer uses force, but it doesn't give any indication as to what does that mean? How will that factor be considered? So if an officer is near a hostile crowd, a tense crowd, should he be more inclined, or he or she be more inclined to use force or less? So I think they need to address that lack of clarity. And then we go section by section with major concerns and suggestions. It's a very long letter. It has a lot of endnotes. This is to provide clarity on what we are trying to convey. And in some cases, we make reference to specific language in specific documents, whether they be the Maryland attorney or federal agencies, and just so that they can see what the language says.
I really, really appreciate the deep dive you did into this policy and very clearly laying out some of its shortcomings. I think something we could consider is, and I don't know, to be quite honest, if this is explicitly mentioned in the use of force policy, but I know that it is part of the training that officers receive that they are to protect their own safety first. And so that does play into use of force, because they will act to disarm someone if it poses a risk to them, which sure, I guess makes sense. But they are prioritizing their own safety over the safety of the person they're interacting with who may be armed. And I don't know if that's explicitly mentioned in this policy, but it is something that I think is a flaw in the training, and I think can cause harm to folks. And so I'm wondering if there's a way that we could incorporate some mention of that into this letter, or if folks think that's appropriate.
Yeah. To the best of my recollection, the policy does not articulate the concept of prioritizing one's safety over what the policy states is that the officer is not required to endanger his or her own safety.
Okay.
And it's kind of difficult to disagree with that. But that's yeah, and it's because that's what most I mean, that's a common standard. So I would not want to change that statement. But I mean, I see your concern, and I think it is addressed in the sense of that when we talk about specifically talk about, let me see if I can find the language. Omitting the broader public safety considerations and de-emphasizing de-escalation. I think your point is addressed to that perception, to what you just said, the concern about prioritizing one's safety over the safety of the person that you're interacting with.
Okay.
I'm, it is a long letter, took a lot of work. And so if there's any comments or suggestions on how I may word something better, I'll be more than glad to do it. And just send me an email, but ideally we can send this forward. And I will also note that this letter would be CC'd. We would send a courtesy copy to the county council as well as the chair of the Police Accountability Board. And I highlight that because there are all these other boards and commissions that sometimes their work overlaps with ours. And I thought it would be appropriate to provide them a courtesy copy of what we're doing and our concerns, and so that they're informed.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great plan. Cherie?
Thank you. I only have one concern about this letter, and it is really my own confusion. Someone someone contacted me, I guess maybe last week or so, and to tell me that the concept of excited delirium was still being used. And so and we are saying specifically, we're glad you no longer use the concept of excited delirium. So I'm just totally confused. I haven't had opportunity to read it myself. I'm sorry, but
I can clarify that.
I just really need clarity on that.
Sure. So you're quite right. And in fact, my original draft of this letter included our objection to the use of the term, that term. Since then, there was another policy announcement. It's another policy that specifically states that the term excited delirium will no longer be applicable. And there is that's in the end notes. And so that's end note number 3. And this is recent. This is Headquarters Memo 2502 dated July 28, 2025. So I think that's policy, and that basically it's already published, and therefore I think it has the same standing as FC 131. And so that's why I went ahead and welcomed that decision.
So thank you. That really helps a lot, because I was these people who contacted me are pretty up on stuff, and and I guess it was about 2 weeks ago. So yeah, I mean, I just think it would be helpful if you have this one sentence in the second paragraph welcoming the use of the decision to no longer use excited delirium. I think it would be helpful to just spell out, that, according to your, policy statement of yada, yada, whatever the date is, that you will no longer use the concept of excited delirium. So that everybody is on the same page now, because that could just be confusing. I was confused as I'll get out.
Okay. No, I think that makes, thank you very much. I think that's a great suggestion. And so I'll move the substance of the end note to the text itself, as you suggested. I think that's a very good suggestion.
Great. Okay. Could we get a motion to approve this letter with the suggestion that Cherie made?
Sorry, so moved.
Someone's got to say it. Okay, so moved. Can I get a second?
Second.
Wonderful. All those in favor, make it known.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? All right, motion carried, letter approved. Thank you for that wonderful hat trick, Francisco. And seriously, thank you for all of the work that you did on those letters. I'm sure it was very in-depth, and these are some excellent content. They're well written. And so I think these will be very, very valuable, and thank you for that. Final item for tonight is going to be an update on our community comment auto response, which I know there has been some back and forth on recently. Who is going to be providing an update on that? Is anyone going to be providing an update on that?
Actually, I'm afraid I don't know what the current status is. I thought you had approved some language at the last meeting, which is now on the website, and it is in both the auto response to an email, which I just tested earlier this evening. So they get that comment in 2 ways. I didn't know if you had wanted some additional changes to the text. Then there might not be anything to discuss.
Well, Francisco, you're muted again.
I'm sorry. I think that the current text is good until after the forum, and then after the forum we may want to revisit it if anybody has a strong feeling one way or the other.
Okay. Could we get that, just a note to put that briefly on the agenda for our October meeting? Okay, wonderful. Is
And
there,
yeah, one thing, it's 7:53, so we have a few more minutes. We were, and I just wanted to follow up on the encryption issue that Susan asked for a meeting with the department to clarify, so we could ask questions about the encryption issue. And the response was, look, we think we covered it all in the PSC, the Public Safety Committee briefing and the slides. And if you have more questions after that, then please, you're welcome to raise them. To be perfectly honest, I don't think that I don't have any more questions. It seems to me very clear that on the one hand, MCPD has made a persuasive argument for the need for encryption. But the problem is that encryption will mean that community members will have to rely solely on the police department's official statements, which could be delayed, incomplete, or selectively released. Now, and as the council staff report cites, critics are concerned that encryption itself degrades departmental transparency and community trust. One of the things that the staff report highlights is the fact that other communities, other jurisdictions have come up with alternative means of addressing that. Addressing the fact that if you're encrypting the communications that MCPD is having, then the state of Colorado has passed a law saying that you have to provide access to the media. The state of New York just did the same thing. Baltimore, in Baltimore, since 2023, the police provides a feed of its communications unencrypted to a website, and that feed is 15 minutes delayed, and that allows the police to basically take out personally identifying information, things that to respect the privacy of individuals, as well as if there are tactical considerations. And so the Baltimore police has been doing this. It's with a website called Broadcastify, and they have agreements with Baltimore City Police and 7 other jurisdictions in Maryland. And it seems to me that either one of these options the other option is credentialing news media entities so that they have access to encrypt the encrypted communications. And there's usually involved a certain amount of fees and cost in buying the equipment to do the to receive the encrypted communications. And my sense, based on the slides, is that were presented, is that right now the MCPD has no plans of considering either one of these alternatives, either the Baltimore City Police Department option or the credentialing option. And it seems to me that maybe this is a subject for discussion at the October meeting, maybe we can take a look at these two other options and maybe come up with a suggestion to the City Council that that this is something that needs to be done.
So what would be an action step for us here?
Can I ask a question before
Sure.
we get to that, please? I'm wondering whether Tacoma Park, Gaithersburg, Rockville, they all have their own police departments. Do they encrypt also?
Susan, I think you.
Yes, they're sharing, I'm not sure about Tacoma Park, but the rest of them are sharing the same dispatch. So the police department has told me that they're also now encrypted.
Okay, so as I understand it, the concern here, and this is the concern I have, is that this encryption actually undermines notions of transparency and openness in government. On the other hand, I totally respect and understand that the police need to have need to be able to communicate, especially in difficult situations, information that should not be available to the public, but especially about tactics and methods. I mean, I totally get that part. Do we know whether or not the Baltimore model has a cost?
I presume that there's a cost involved, and there's no cost involved to the public, but I presume that there's a cost involved to the police department in having someone review and decide, okay, this information should not be made public, so we need to delete it. They blank it or beep it, I don't know, when they mention PII, or if they're saying, okay, we are, we're going now, there's an armed robbery taking place at such and such, as deleting the address so that folks are not aware of what, and so I presume that there is some cost involved in that, and if there is, my sense is, and this is something that I think the City Council needs to weigh in and cough up the money for something like that, because I think it is important to the community and to all of us.
But and that's why I asked about the cost, because really, if it's just on a time delay, right, then there's no cost. You're not sending the thing in real time. You're sending it 20 minutes later, right?
Right.
Which and let me just
somebody has to be there and have the responsibility to I don't know what the word is.
Probably just set the programming or the algorithms or whatever, to do the time delay. You probably don't have to have an on the spot review of the information. Okay. So,
Folks,
let me just be what I'm 100% opposed. I'm 100% opposed to two things. One, that all the information is encrypted. I don't think that's good in democracy. I really don't. It really troubles me. And I'm also 100% against having members of the press or whoever being credentialed somehow, because I think that's dangerous in a different kind of way. You're only allowing certain people access to the information. I don't really like that. So if we are proposing that they abandon or somehow modify this encryption stuff, I think we need to be clear about that, first of all, that their encryption decision should be modified. And how we get, the modification that we suggest, I don't think we have to come up with the answers. I mean, I think we can make the suggestions like Baltimore does this. You could just time delay it. There are other things that can go on, but I think we need to raise the issue as being inconsistent with the notion of transparency in policing and openness in government. I guess that's my bottom line.
Okay.
There are issues with privacy laws concerning HIPAA. If someone has a medical issue at their home, that doesn't need to be disclosed. If you're looking to redact various portions of a police transmission, you're going to need a full-time person there, just like they do on TV, to bleep out different types of things that monitor that. That's a cost. It's not. I think there's a lot of privacy issues in here that I would want protected, that I wouldn't want other people to know about. Credentialing is, they do that at the White House. They do these things for people, a right to know with the press. Sometimes they are credentialed so that when they know that there's a disturbance or a shooting, that the press are able to be dispatched to that location at the same time. That's what that's for. So I'm for transparency, but there's privacy issues here which need to be taken care of. That's all I have to say about it.
okay.
Yep.
Do we have an action step that we want to take for tonight, or do we want to table further discussion for our October meeting?
I could draft
Maybe it should be on it doesn't seem that we're aligned on this quite yet. And so maybe it should be on the agenda to have further discussion at the start of the meeting next week or next month.
I agree with
after
that.
it would be in October, and I could draft a letter that we could use just to focus that discussion, rather than, and so that folks can have plenty of time to consider the issues. I want to, I think we're not so different, so far apart, the discussion that I heard here. And I mean, I think everyone understands that there's a need to provide privacy, and particularly with PII and tactical considerations. I think that's an understanding. But the question then is, okay, if you're going to encrypt, what's the solution? What needs to be done? Because yes, there is a loss of transparency, and we can address that. And there are a couple of options. And as Cherise said, we don't have to provide the answers, but we can articulate our concerns, and then maybe provide suggestions as to what other jurisdictions have done, and so that the council can then decide. And so that would be, we would have that discussion, more specific discussion, with having people a little bit of extra time to talk it over with their contacts, or to do a little bit more research. But certainly I thought that the staff report and the slides provided certainly enough information for us to consider whether we want to make a recommendation to the council about this.
Absolutely. Matter of fact, from the Montgomery County Police Department sent a letter to Sarah. It was kind of a mild rebuke that we should all look at the public safety positions that they already mentioned, so that they don't have to do it over again.
So, you know, Francisco, if you feel like you have the capacity to draft a letter on this, like,
I have 2 months.
you have 2 months. Well, you always do fantastic work, and I'm sure all of us would very much appreciate that as a focal point for discussion. Christina.
I just wanted to reiterate that in that letter, Francisco, if we could make sure that because it seems like the only real distinction is having the redactions and the privacy there. And then if I don't know if there's a cost associated with the encryptions that they've moved to, because then that could just be shuffled. There's not a cost. Okay, I see Susan shaking her head. No. And so would cost be a deterrent from moving to something that maintains transparency? I just think I want to keep that, like, I would like to see that vibe and that energy there, like that we acknowledge that this may have a cost, but it's invaluable, it's invaluable. So
yeah.
Right. No,
that's a good point, Christina.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Good.
Is there a motion that needs to be made on this? This feels like just an action step for our next meeting.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Wonderful. Is there any other comments, questions, feedback, thoughts? John.
Yes, I just want to make sure that we're clear on the agenda for next meeting. I'm assuming, based on what we discussed this evening, that Francisco or yourself or Brian would be facilitating that.
On our public forum?
Yeah, public forum. And also, have we invited any council members to join us? Just based off what we discussed this evening, I think it would be good maybe to have 1 or 2 to come and say, hey, this group has been valuable to us in terms of as far as what they're providing. I just wanted to offer that suggestion.
I could see the value in inviting Councilmember Jawando and maybe Councilmember Mink. Folks can weigh in on that.
I'm not sure of the drawback from having them, or if there is one. I do see that it could draw more community members, if they know that there'll be council members there. So, but I don't know if there's any reason why. I don't have the foresight right now to see if there's any reason why not to like have a formal invite out to them. I think it's a good idea.
I agree, and I mean, does it hurt to invite all of them?
Well, just keep in mind that if you invite, the more people you invite, the more people who will feel the need to address the audience as well. And so, you know, I have no problems other than the consideration that people will be taking up time from our presentation and then the comments that folks will provide either in person or online. And the question of inviting 1 or 2 council members, I don't know. The question becomes, if you invite one or two, why not invite all of them? And you know, is there any protocol here that we might be violating? And again, I defer to Susan on this if there's any concern in that way.
It's already an advertised open public forum. We would have to also advertise it as part of council too if we ended up with a quorum. So it would just be an additional advertisement in different places. So
I see. Okay, I mean, in that case, I see no issue with inviting all the council members. I don't know that they'll all come out anyway. Quorum for the council is 6. Yeah. Okay. So the thing is, if we invite all of the council members, we don't know if all of them will show up. So we don't, you know, we could ask them to RSVP by a certain time, but people's schedules change, especially council members. They're very busy on evenings. I feel like to avoid that, we could invite fewer than 6 council members, because then we don't have to worry about that at all.
I think our last forum was virtual, and I think we had Rondo and we had Sydney Katz, and they came because I think it was something, a specific topic though that we were covering. So I'm not sure if that makes a difference, Susan, if we say we're just going to talk about this, and so we want, you know, would that have to be in a quorum for them?
You know, a natural thing would be to invite all the members of the Public Safety Committee.
Yeah, I feel like Mink, Jawando, Katz, and Ludke, although, well, I think there could be benefit to inviting Ludke. Although, you know, we have some personal differences, but I think hearing direct feedback from folks in the community could help inform her approach.
Yeah.
You know, I think we should invite all the council members and the county executive. If they don't want to come, that's fine. I mean, it doesn't, you know, doesn't make any, it means, you know, it is the fault is ours in not inviting them. You know,
I agree.
the fault becomes theirs if they choose not to participate. 2026 is an election year. I mean, I'm just saying. So,
Yeah, that's
you know, this is
all right.
You know, we should extend the invitation. If they choose not to take it, that's on them. You know, I mean, that's on them. They go to plenty.
That is a good argument, Tree.
I think that there will be 3 or 4 people that we've never seen at any of these sorts of meetings who will be interested in coming simply because it's an election year. And I think that is fine, because I think that there needs to be more of an awareness of what the issues might be.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Are these invitations with expectation of RSVP? We keep saying they might just show up and things of that nature, but do they normally tell us like, okay, I plan to attend?
when you say you want to invite them, are you going to give them each an opportunity to speak?
I think
that's what we're cautioning. What we're saying we don't want to happen, right? We do not want that to happen.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it should be a listening session. Yeah, out of respect for the citizens. Honestly, Officer Brewer, couldn't have said it better myself.
Right. I totally agree. This is not that you know, they can have community meetings whenever they want. You know, they don't need us to have a community meeting. And so if they choose to attend, then it should be clear it is to listen. And just like any other member of the public, if they want to weigh in on whatever, then, you know, they should be recognized like anybody else.
Yep,
But
they should line up with the mic.
We should carve out any particular time for any of them to speak. I think that would. I think Officer Brewer is right. This is for the citizens, the residents of this lovely county.
So we can send them invitations, but we should make clear that it is a listening session. Yes. All right, thank you, Henry. I know we are running quite late. We should make it clear that this is a listening session for members of the community to weigh in.
Does that affect the rule of having to publicize this differently in the event they make quorum at our meeting at the public session?
I mean,
No.
they're still
Still have to
there.
advertise it. So
No, it doesn't, it, I can't think of how this affects anything. It is still an open meeting and they can attend. I don't see how that would have an effect.
Kind of like this being here.
Yep. All right. Any final words?
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
my-
yeah. Okay.
Sorry, but my final word is to really urge all of the commissioners that once we have the announcement out, to make sure that we share it with our communities to really make sure that we have good participation. Our commission represents a lot of different sectors of our community, both geographically and otherwise. And I think what we want to do is get a good representation. And particularly if we can reach out to the folks in the community who normally don't get a chance to come out to these meetings and to express their views and their concerns. That's what we want to hear from, if possible. Sorry.
Absolutely. Nope, it's a good point, Francisco. We should all communicate this to our neighbors and folks in our communities. I would love to see my neighbors there. I would love to see y'all's neighbors there. Okay. It is 8:18. Can I get a motion to adjourn, please?
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second that motion.
Everyone in the world has seconded the motion. All right. All in favor, say aye.
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 All right. Motion carried. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night all. Good night all.